nonprofit that brings these History Camp discussions to you each week. We are excited to have with us tonight Lieutenant Colonel retired Harold Knudsen. Harold is an Illinois native. His career spans 25 years of active duty Army service and includes 7 resident career artillery command and staff Army schools and colleges. He has many years of tactical experience in the integration of fire support into maneuver plans and fire control computations for cannon units. A combat veteran of Desert Storm, he performed extensive artillery fire planning and execution in support of the U.S. breakthrough of the Iraqi line and penetration into Iraq. His years of staff work at the Corps, Army, and Pentagon levels give him a strong understanding of Army operations from the lowest to the highest levels. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Harold, and thank you for your service.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for your kind words. Appreciate it.
Well, Harold, we're delighted to have you. What a great opportunity for us to hear and get a better understanding of an important Civil War general from someone who, and this is rare for authors, knows exactly what it's like to be on a battlefield. Let's start. Give us a sense of, given your experience and so forth, how did you select post your career in the military? How did you select Longstreet to study and ultimately write about? What was some of the most surprising things about Longstreet as you studied him?
Well, as a child, I got the usual mainstream writings and presentation of him in grade school and whatever, which was mostly negative because of this the Lost Cause movement after the war. So a lot of the writings were negative on him, and of course that's what I understood. That's what I understood to be correct, I suppose. When Douglas Southall Freeman writes about him in those days, that was what people believed. But when I became an Army officer as an adult and started learning my profession, and then looking at these Civil War campaigns and battles and these generals, these personalities and what they did, I began to see that a lot of the things that had been said about him were really connected to politics and propaganda after the war because of his politics after the war. They weren't, in my opinion, then they weren't really true. And so studying some of the things that he did, I realized that, what he did was correct. He did a lot of good things in his body of work. And that was the hook that got me started on him and made me interested in him as an adult.
How interesting. Well, again, you have such extensive experience on the battlefield. How do you think that before we kind of get into some of the specifics, how do you think that your experience on the battlefield maybe changed the way you understood some of those conflicts and some of his tactics and perhaps some of his thinking versus what another writer who didn't have the experience of command and of being on a battlefield?
Well, for example, in Desert Storm, we did a large offensive attack, something similar to what the Germans did in, say, 1940 France. And if you understand how to put one of those together, what is required with all of the formations and everything that goes into something like that, and then you study, for example, when I started to look at what he did at Chickamauga, lessons learned from what didn't go correctly at Gettysburg, what didn't work out for them correctly at Gettysburg. He turned it on its head to create this narrow storm column that the Germans called the Schwerpunkt, and it broke through. I realized this is something that he does well here in 1863, decades before it showed up in warfare in the 20th century. So that's one example of how I get to him, how I get to this subject, General Longstreet, from a purely professional military through lens, I guess I would say.
So you referenced Longstreet and at Gettysburg and so forth. Perhaps you can provide some context on some of the discussion around Longstreet's approach versus Lee at Gettysburg. I know that you've briefed and done battlefield tours and so forth. We have lots of folks who love the Civil War. We're also probably some folks listening tonight who love history, but perhaps don't have the context for some of that debate or discussion that would be helpful to help them understand before we dig deeper.
Okay, well, I think most of the context of what people of common, let me just say the common opinion that comes out of a lot of the writings about General Longstreet has been quite negative, I think, at least up until the novel Killer Angels was written, which I think was somewhat brought General Longstreet to life in a novel format, and some of these other characters as well to life. And I think that was a treatment that was kind of kind to him compared to everything before. But everything before, by a lot of these lost cause type writers, was negative, trying to place blame on him. And a lot of that came from people like Confederate General Jubal Early and the Confederate Artillery Coordinator William Pendleton. After Lee died in 1870, they started to be vocally against General Longstreet in speeches and writings and newspapers and whatnot. And they started to cast all this negativity about him. He was slow, or he was not enthusiastic about supporting Lee's plans, or he was, and another one was a complete lie. He was given an order the day before to attack Early on the 2nd. And that was debunked by McLaws, one of Longstreet's lieutenants, and others too. But things like that spun and got out of control and snowballed into, through the latter part of the 18th century and the 19th century into the 20th century. So that's the context, I think, that Longstreet was then cast in from all of this. But I think Lee versus Longstreet on what they were facing there, I think Longstreet was correct and Lee was incorrect overall. Now, first, let me talk about the overall situation of this whole thing of going into Pennsylvania as a strategy. Longstreet was trying to convince Lee and the Confederate government that a strategic defense was what they needed to do and defend the Confederacy and make it painful for the Union to prosecute the war against them. And Longstreet also considered the political component of this, which was to wear down the North, make it, administer these high casualty events on them so that politically it would be too difficult for the Lincoln administration to keep prosecuting the war. And so as to kind of run out the clock, if you will, on the Union effort on Lincoln through November of 1864, and maybe he would lose the election that way. That was one of the things that Longstreet was trying to get people to understand. And so that he felt that it was more important to shore up the Western theater that wasn't doing so well compared to the Eastern theater. Now, he was overruled eventually, and so Lee convinced the government we should go into Pennsylvania. And I think the biggest mistake that Lee made before they left Virginia was he really didn't have a campaign objective. It was very vague. We were going to come out of the Shenandoah Valley through Maryland into Pennsylvania, and we're going to move toward the Susquehanna River. That's very vague. That's not an objective. An objective should be a precise place, and also with some instructions on what tasks are going to be done there. And all of that never really happened. So when they went into Pennsylvania, Lee's subordinates, which are Longstreet and A.P. Hill and Ewell, the three primary corps, they're not really sure what the actions are along the way. They were gathering foodstuffs and making demonstrating their presence there. but that doesn't really do much for you. And then Lee then gets news through Longstreet's spy or scout, whatever you want to call him, Mr. Harrison. He's in that, you can learn about him in that movie Gettysburg from 1993, that he's seen 2 federal corps, and then all of a sudden Lee wants to move toward them. And so he does, and that this causes a collision, and he gets sucked into this battle that in a place that affords his army no advantages whatsoever, and all of the advantages really go to the Union defensive effort, and he loses. So I think that's the overall context of Longstreet being right and Lee being wrong in the strategic sense. The strategic sense for national military strategy for what they should have been doing, in Longstreet's opinion, and also, the strategy of what they, even though they decided to then go into Pennsylvania, what were they going to do up there? That was still not clear either, and that caused this this problem. Now, I'll finish that question on one last point here. In the military, when we have an objective, when we select an objective before you write an operations order or whatever, the key thing about it, one of the things that makes objectives so important is, well, in the British Army, they emphasize maintenance of that objective. Because if you don't have a sound and identifiable objective, how do you maintain an objective when you don't really know what you're doing? So that was one of the big failings, I think, of the mission planning there. That's on Lee's part.
Very interesting. I think today we're used to this idea of perhaps, is there continued popular support for a conflict? What might be the impact on an administration and so on? Interesting to hear that discussed in the context of the Civil War and the operations on the battlefield. Do you want to take us through again? I'm sure that some of the folks listening tonight may have a deep understanding of some of these conflicts. I think you've selected some maps, perhaps. Do you want to go through some of these other conflicts and share some of your insights as someone who, again, understands, as an intimate understanding of what it's like to plan these campaigns, and perhaps help illustrate some of the strengths or shortcomings of the strategies that were chosen?
Yeah, could we have the map that has the Fairview, it has Fulda Gap on the top and Fairview Park on the bottom? And I'll explain some of this strategy as it pertains to, say, going into Pennsylvania. So the U.S. Army, as part of the NATO Army in Europe, from the end of the Second World War until the collapse of the Soviet Union, we had in Europe 4 divisions, and then there's 2 of them are depicted here. Mine, which is 8th ID, you see the 8th ID patch, and also the 3rd Armored Division, which is off to the left. And we were tasked then with these, what were called general GDPs, general defense positions. And they were at select points where we could use the best possible terrain, high ground, and also high ground around these low areas that we called maybe, just to slang a bowl, where we'd place a kill zone. And my division, 8th ID, was going to fight around the German city of Fulda, which is that bigger circle there with the 3 patches around it. And just northeast of that is a smaller circle called a town called Hundfeld. There was another bowl there. Now you see these, what we thought were going to be the Soviet penetrations into our sector in West Germany. One was the main effort was going to come down the Autobahn 5 toward Gießen there, that long arrow, and then turn south and seize Frankfurt. And we were going to attack that thing on its flanks. Now, before that, the Soviets were going to hit us with these supporting attacks. My division, as you can see, coming out of East Germany there, all along in the south. And we were going to try and chop those up and break those up. And we were going to use these high ground spots and catch them in these bowls and hopefully, attrit them and demolish them there, each one in sequence, before we slammed into the main flank of the main thrust. And that was our defense plan, now we were going to be massively outnumbered, but we believed that our better equipment and our better operational acumen would give us some success. So whether or not we would win the Third World War is not known, but this was what we were supposed to do. So from my training in this type of future war for me in the 1980s, this was my time over there was 87, 88, 89 or so. I looked at this, and when you look at the campaign, comparing this to the campaign that Lee was doing in Pennsylvania, he didn't. The problem, as I said, not of having an objective, I think hamstrung him and his army from being able to select one of these places where they could set up a good defense and then inflict another mass casualty event on the Union Army like at Fredericksburg. So let's say, for example, Lee had set Harrisburg, Pennsylvania as the objective right from the very beginning. They would have gone up there pretty darn quick. Ewell was already up there. He probably would have been up there mid-month June 1863, and there was nothing to stop him to walk into Harrisburg. And if he'd gone into Harrisburg, that just let's say 24 hours, that would have been a huge embarrassment to the Lincoln administration, because he would have gone in there, and collected more requisitioned more things from the shops and the businesses and whatever, and it would have been a huge black eye to the Lincoln administration, because this is the most northern state capital, and I'm sure Lincoln would have put a lot of pressure on General Meade to get up there and do something about it. Well, if you look, and just south of, I have this hypothetical here where Meade now moves forward to do something about it, to go eject General Ewell's corps from Harrisburg. Now, just south there is high ground in an area today called Fairview Park, would be perfect, just like up here in Germany in the 1980s, where they could set up on high ground like Longstreet had done at Fredericksburg in December of 1862, and receive the Union Army and try to inflict another repulse upon them, this time in Pennsylvania. So this is the sort of thing that, Longstreet, although he didn't want to go into Pennsylvania, he didn't think this was good national military strategy. Once he's ordered to do so, he figured that then we should try and set up a battle like this where we have a good possibility, a better probability than the Union of winning. So this is a kind of a comparative to that sort of strategy that we would use in the 1980s in Germany to what he probably was envisioning if they could do it in Pennsylvania. So I hope this map is interesting to folks in that way.
Let me just interject. I know that we've all thought of the Cold War and how that might turn into a hot war, and the theoretical possibility of Soviets moving west. It's chilling to hear it described in the detail that you described it, the reality of what that might have been.
Horrifying.
Exactly. So I realize that's not the focus of tonight's talk. That is fascinating. Fascinating. Are there some other? I think there's some other maps. Are there some other examples that you'd like to walk through?
Yeah. Could I have the the Gettysburg map, which is the second day, July the 2nd, 1863. So now we get down into the previous discussion was a higher level, the operational level. Now we're going to get down into the tactical level. The two armies are joined. They've already fought the day before, just north of town there, and the Confederates shoved them through Gettysburg and pushed them down into the terrain that Meade held on to and set up his army on. And he did a very good job. Now, on July the 2nd, early in the morning, Lee is up and he's on his horse and he's scouting around looking for looking for the Union Army and to try to figure out what he wants to do. And early in the morning, he sees that much of Cemetery Hill there is not covered. And he notices the terrain features the round tops, but not all, Meade has not filled it out yet at 6 a.m. Now, Meade started his work about midnight, 11 o'clock midnight the night before, as the First Corps, Union Corps started coming in off the road, but they wouldn't all file in until the next morning. And then Lee then rides around to the other side to see what's going on Ewell's side, which is, way, further north, and that eats up time. So then Lee comes back, and he has this idea that, well, I'm going to attack the Union left, and I'm going to strike with Longstreet's corps. Now, Longstreet's only got 2 of his 3 divisions up, and so Lee decides, well, I'll support with A.P. Hill and give a division over from A.P. Hill. But now at this point, it's 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, and Lee still hasn't formulated his plan or given any instructions to Longstreet what he wants to do. By this time, Meade's already filled in more of his line, and he's almost got it all covered over to the round tops. And so now he's made a plan on imprecise, on incorrect intel of the enemy, intelligence of the estimate of the enemy, because the clock is ticking, and the Union are already doing their thing, getting themselves ready. So that's the big problem here on the 2nd. So now you can see the squiggly lines as the two on the Confederate side, the route that the 2 divisions, Longstreet's 2 divisions that are available, have to go to get down to that southern sector and get ready to go, Hood and McLaws. And it's late in the morning by the time they're halfway ready or halfway in position. Then there's that whole thing about a countermarch and all that. I'm not going to get into all that, but when they were nearly in position, General Hood realized that, well, I don't know why you picked this area. We're just going to slam right into the Union line, and there's no advantage there whatsoever. And he could see that Union now were on the round top. So the arrow by General Hood's division swinging around, and then that other arrow that comes up through the wagon, there's a wagon train there. That's where the Union wagon trains were. And then to hit the side of that Union formation coming in, that was his plan, to go around what he saw were strong points. And I think he was correct. He took this to General Longstreet, and General Longstreet took it to Lee, realizing that the situation had changed, and he argued it. Now, General Longstreet and General Hood were infantry officers, career infantry officers, so they knew what the heck they were talking about. And this is where there's a difference in understanding, professional understanding. Lee was not a combat arms officer. He was an engineer officer, so he doesn't really know what works and what doesn't work with the infantry like his 2 subordinates do. So here you have this disagreement, and Longstreet and Hood are overruled, and they have to carry out this attack, and that becomes the Battle of the Peach Orchard and Devil's Den, and they make progress, but with heavy casualties, and they're stopped at the end of the day. They never turn the flank. They never rupture the line. Now Sickles' corps is chewed up. There was a mistake there on Sickles' part, coming too far forward, but that ends the 2nd day. And I think this is a mistake by Lee, not listening to these 2 infantrymen, because I think if they'd done an end run around that strong point, the round top, they would have had a better opportunity to wreak havoc into the rear areas and roll up the flank, perhaps, that they didn't have, just hitting the line head on. Now, if we could have the map that's called the Gonzalo line, I'll show you a future example of why this works. Now, on the previous map where Hood suggests making the end run, a lot of historians have also criticized this, stating, well, he would have to contend with lots of Union reserves, and they would just simply be crushed. Well, that's not knowable because it didn't happen. But there is advantage to the side that has the initiative and is making the attack. And it's more difficult for the defender to have to react, and they don't always put together, they don't always marshal their reserves in strength like the attacker might be in strength. And here's an example of how it works. This is in the future, in 1942, in the North African campaign, where the Field Marshal Rommel is trying to undo the British Ghazala line, which has a similar shape to Meade's line at Gettysburg, and it has a strong point in the south there, if you can see the name of it, called Bir Hakeim, which is, you see the French Foreign Legion flag. That was being held by a French Foreign Legion unit there. Very strong position. They tried, the Italian tank division had probed it, and they got pushed back. So Rommel either had to penetrate this line somewhere, or he had to go around it. And he chose the latter. He chose what Hood wanted to do at Gettysburg. Now, Rommel had a follow-on objective, which was to take the town of Tobruk, which is up there on the Mediterranean coast. But first, he has to undo this line. So he takes his 3 German tank divisions, the German Afrika Korps, and he swings around. He's got them covered by the 1 Italian tank division there. He's got their flank is covered by them, and they swing around into the rear. Now, the British marshal reserves, and they attack, but they are pushed back each and every way. And Rommel makes this line untenable when he gets into the rear, and the whole thing collapses, and the British are defeated. And shortly after this battle, for the Ghazala line, he's able to take Tobruk. So this is another comparative to another war where, you know, the right timing and tempo and the right choice of course of action, like Hood wanted to do, and Longstreet argued in favor of his idea, that worked. And I would argue against those historians that say it would fail. That no, I think it would work, because there are probably other examples in history where this sort of thing works. So another way I look at it, you know, comparing, as a military professional, you have to know lots of different time periods to come up, you know, to reach into your bag of tools to, in any given situation, quickly, to know what right looks like and know what wrong looks like.
You know, Harold, this is so interesting. You've got your book coming out, I believe, in October. Is that right?
I believe that's the date they're going to publish. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what we're showing tonight are maps and annotations and so forth that will be appearing in your book. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And so, you know, maybe I assume perhaps some others have done this, but I don't believe it's something where we frequently see, or where we often see, this sort of analysis and direct comparison.
Right. Well, like you were saying, and tonight is the test drive of these particular maps. But like you were saying, you know, me being a military guy, I'm a little bit different than, say, a college professor or history professor, because I am wickering in the tactics, the operations, the fire support, the strategic things that come from professional knowledge in my world. Makes me different from a biographer who has a different, you know, outlook,
Indeed.
a different professional outlook on history.
Indeed. Now, is there another map or two that we want to talk through?
Yeah, let's go to Chickamauga, since I'm using some World War II comparison here. Now, I had mentioned that German word earlier, that long German word called Schwerpunkt. And you had asked me earlier, before we went live here, you know, what was the difference between this and Blitzkrieg. And I'll just say for your audience real quick, in World War II, Blitzkrieg it was a slang word, probably created by newspaper people who really didn't understand military things, but they did understand that warfare, as it had been evolved by some of the German thinkers who had World War I experience, who were captains, lieutenants, and whatnot in World War I, and now are colonels and generals in the 1930s going into the Second World War had developed these breakthrough tactics by incorporating the tank, and that the engine of a tank is no less a weapon than its main gun and its machine guns, because it gave it mobility. And when you put all these together in large formations, brigades and then divisions, the Germans went to the level of divisions by the 1930s. They created the first tank divisions in the 1930s, and everybody else followed. This was a powerful new revolution in military affairs, and tank units could go penetrate a line and then drive into the rear areas and go after supply depots and capture enemy headquarters, and rip up communications lines and all of that. And so when that happens, then it causes panic, and an army can fall apart when it has no guidance and no understanding, no word back from its rear areas and its headquarters, its leaders. And that's what happened. That's the kind of thing that the Germans did on a large scale. Offensive armored warfare developed by Germany that became known as Blitzkrieg. And it was large scale, tied in, close air support, field artillery. Everything was synchronized. Now, you don't have all these different arms in the Civil War, but in World War II, at the unit level, where the Germans, for example, in say France, 1940, where they sprung their Blitzkrieg on the nation of France and crushed it in about 6 weeks, where they chose to wait their main attack, that was known as the Schwerpunkt, the point of the main attack, where you're going to wait your attack. And that came through the Ardennes forest. Multiple divisions went through there. So the same principle happens here that Longstreet does at the Battle of Chickamauga. Now, one of the things about the Battle of Gettysburg a month before, almost 2 months before this, was that the attack formation that Lee wanted was a wide one. So all the divisions are shoulder to shoulder, all the brigades are shoulder to shoulder, and then they're supposed to just converge at those clump of trees and on Cemetery Ridge, and then they have to also contend with getting pounded by Union artillery for over a mile in the open, and then when they come into musket range, you're going to get that as well. Well, Longstreet learns from that, and when he gets here out to Georgia to reinforce Bragg's army after the fighting at this battle on the first day, the 19th of September, was over. He takes over the left wing the morning of the 20th of September, 1863, and becomes the wing commander. And the idea that Bragg was going to have was this attack on his far right, or the Union left there, and it was going to be an en echelon attack, and everybody was just going to push, and they were going to shove the Union Army down to the south west on this map into an area that would have made it difficult for them to defend, and they would have been separated from the city of Chattanooga, their new supply base. So, well, that doesn't materialize on the right because there are problems of getting the orders down on Polk's wing. In Bragg's army, there were communication problems, and when this doesn't happen, Longstreet realizes that nothing's materialized, no attack has gone in it on the Confederate right. Well, it doesn't start until 10. Longstreet realizes, I've got to improvise, I've got to do something else, because this whole plan has miscarried, and General Bragg probably doesn't even realize it. So he comes up with this idea instead that he's going to put together this column of troops out of these four western divisions, and the units from Virginia that are sitting behind him, which you see there on that bottom schematic. And he slides everybody over to the right to cover up some vacant space and lock in with the other Confederate wing under Polk. And then he fashions these 8 brigades in 5 echelons in this very narrow column, which is only about 450 yards wide, just like the tank division in World War II. And he packs them all together, and then when it's time to attack, he throws them in, and right through the Union line they go, and they collapse the entire Union right wing at 11 o'clock in the morning. So to me, this is exactly like the offensive armored warfare doctrine that I came to learn and understand and be part of. That came into being in World War II. We used it in Desert Storm on a large scale, and here it is in 1863 of course, on a smaller scale, and it worked perfectly. This was the biggest Confederate victory in the West in the whole war because of this piece of work.
Harold, let's talk about another map or two. This is really fascinating.
Let's go to Chattanooga. So after Longstreet's breakthrough and collapsing the half of the Union Army, the guy on the Union side who was thinking on his feet was Major General Thomas, and General Thomas didn't fold. He collected up all the panicking, retreating Union troops, and he made a stand on a spot called Snodgrass Hill at Chickamauga at Chickamauga battlefield, and he held out there until dark. And Longstreet was just bringing artillery, some batteries of artillery, and starting to pound him just before it got dark. And once it got dark, the fighting was over. And then Thomas was able to extricate the army. So he was very lucky, and he got the army through the passes, some of them on Missionary Ridge, and got them into the city of Chattanooga there. And you see all those squiggly lines there around the city of Chattanooga. Those are the defensive positions that the Union fell into, and they made a very compact defense in depth and sort of dared Bragg to come and get them. And they were set up with a supply line that ran to the north of there that goes off this map, goes some 60 miles in the beginning over to Bridgeport, Alabama, where there's a rail terminus. And you can see on the bottom map, you can see Bridgeport over there on the left. So now we get into the level of war that is above tactics, called operational art. Operational art is a level of war that interrelates tactics and strategy. Operational art has to do with the movement and synchronization of usually the core level, element, maybe the arm, and also the army level. But it's like moving. It's the business of the lieutenant general, so to speak, and the 4-star general. The moving of your chess pieces at that level, and figuring out how to harness and take advantage of different types of things to be able to dominate your opponent. So Bragg settles into this partial siege that you can see there on the top map, and he really doesn't know what else to do beyond this, and thinks that this will work and that the Union Army is going to starve, and they'll have to leave Chattanooga or give up. I guess he was thinking, but that's all he does. He gives away the initiative. He doesn't continue to maneuver to try and get around them or do something else to unhinge that Union position there in Chattanooga. Now, this is a problem in the realm of operational art for the Union for the Confederates, because the Union time is on their side. President Lincoln directs General Grant to get over to this area and take charge of this whole thing. He's going to be the fixer of this for the Union side. And he's got a number of chess pieces to work with. He's got that Union Army there that's in Chattanooga, and then he's got General Sherman coming from Vicksburg, Mississippi, coming over across into Alabama. They won't get there till November, but they're on their way. And General Hooker brought elements of 2 Union Corps by rail from Virginia as fast as they could get them out here, down through Nashville into this area, into Bridgeport. So these arrows on the bottom show you Grant's ability, his choices of maneuver into the rear areas of the Confederate situation into Bragg's army once he's had enough time to get his pieces in place. And this General Bragg doesn't understand. And this is what General Longstreet is trying to explain to him. We got to do something. And I think that something is to shut down that town of Bridgeport and that other rail terminus called Stevenson before it's too late. and take advantage of the time we have left. So if we could go to the Bridgeport plan map, and I'll explain what his plan was in another comparative. So, so what Longstreet realizes that he's got to go after they need to go after this Bridgeport rail terminus and the other one at Stevenson and shut those down. Take those away from the Union. Deny their use. We call those in the military force flow entry point. This is where all the groceries are coming down from Nashville, and the wagon trains and the mule trains are bringing them over the mountains, over the north of the Tennessee River into the rear of the Union position, and that's how they're keeping those troops fed that are stuck there in Chattanooga. And Longstreet envisioned if they attack Bridgeport and seize that rail terminus, that food shuts down in a day. That's it. Nothing else is going in there. There are 42,000 Union troops in there that are on half rations. If the groceries are turned off, they've got to leave real fast, or you're going to have people starting to be very hungry, if not starving, within 2 or 3 days. So this is, he decides that this is what needs to happen. Now, in the realm of operational art, there are a bunch of facets. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the most important one you first have to determine is called center of gravity, your enemy's center of gravity. What is it? Once you can do that, you can plan how to go after it, how to attack it. And in a comparative that I learned at one of the war colleges in the military, we all had to study MacArthur's Inchon landing and operational art in the context of that. And in the situation that MacArthur had is there on that bottom map of the Korean Peninsula. Same kind of situation at Chattanooga. Down there on the bottom of that peninsula, you see the U.S. 8th Army there is under siege by a massive North Korean army that was something on the order of 130,000 men. And the 8th Army at the time was about 40,000. So they were being pressed in that little pocket. The UN went to the United States and the UK. How do we, this emergency situation, they put MacArthur in charge. He was going to be the fixer of this situation. And they were able to put together another 40,000 troops. And MacArthur's plan was to land to pick what's called, this is the second most important facet in operational art, a decisive point. A decisive point is a spot that you can use to leverage. It's like a fulcrum you can use to leverage, crowbar your enemy out of something that you want him to get out of. And, he decides, I'm going to land at Incheon, drive through Seoul, and then I can cut all of their lines of communication and supply to the north, and that whole 130,000 man army will collapse, or it'll have to retreat very fast. And he was absolutely right. Now, MacArthur got a lot of pushback, a lot of disagreement from the Joint Chiefs and so on. They first wanted him just to put those 40,000, add them to the Pusan perimeter, and bring those numbers up to 80,000, and then figure out how to push out there. But he said, no, that's wrong, because the enemy's center of gravity is at 130,000 troops that are all massed. They have the advantage of mass, and they're all deployed. So they'll crush us. We won't make much headway. I know we have superior weapons and air force and all that, but we're not doing other things that can make our position even better. And he decided that you attack a larger enemy like this indirectly at a decisive point to leverage against them, and that was Incheon. And it worked. It worked beautifully. The whole North Korean army had to retreat, and less than a quarter of them escaped when MacArthur struck across into their rear area. So this is the application. This is the same thing that Longstreet envisions here to try and do, from the other way around to undo, to destroy Chattanooga, the Union hold on Chattanooga, you attack it indirectly by taking the decisive point of Bridgeport and Stevenson. You shut down the food supply flow, and then you deny those places, those uses to the Union reinforcements. Sherman can't come in there now. Hooker's going to be chased away and dispersed. And then the only other Union troops are Burnside up at Knoxville. I suppose they could be brought down, but they're going to be at a disadvantage. So the real problem is the Union troops, the 42,000 troops in Chattanooga, they run out of food and the whole thing collapses. So this is his this plan that he had that was rejected by Bragg, but again, another example to me of how he was this modern thinking guy in 1863, coming up with a brilliant stroke like this that probably would have been very problematic for the Union had he done this. Now, if they had success in this theater, it would have put Atlanta out of reach for a long time and would have put them, pushed them into 1864 having the strategic initiative in this theater, and the Union would have had to figure out how to fix a lot of things. So it may have given them a huge political edge if they had a big win in this theater on the heels of the tactical win at Chickamauga. So it's a little more complicated, the operational level, than the tactical level, but I think this is a good illustration of how he was thinking that way.
Well, Harold, this has been very interesting. We've got some questions, and Carrie's going to join us in just a second. But before we do that, I'm especially curious. You've studied Longstreet deeply, an important Civil War general. Are you going to take the same approach to other military figures or conflicts?
I probably will. I actually kind of left the professional military look at something, and I have been working on a founding father. So a history of somebody named Fisher Ames, who I think is important. So I'm probably going to finish that one up. But I definitely would use comparative analysis, military analysis, mission planning, and all of that to look at other people as well. I mean, I'm interested in all kinds of people. General Meade on the Union side. Nathan Bedford Forrest is always interesting on the Southern side. I'd like to know more about some of the lesser known, Union and Confederate generals, and of course I would look at them this way because this is what I am. This is how my mind works now.
Well, as we were saying before we came on, we are eager to have you at an in-person history camp. So, okay. Carrie, do you have some questions?
We do. We have a viewer who would like to know, would it have been realistic for Longstreet to resist Pickett's charge more forcefully with Lee, since it was the antithesis of Longstreet's tactical understanding of the preeminence of tactical defense?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Lee and Longstreet were very close, and they were very close personally. But these were two professional soldiers. They had no break in service since they both came into the military, and Lee had served longer. He was older, but Longstreet also had no break in service. So, the professional military man will, as Longstreet did, offer his views. And he says this quite explicitly in his memoir. He told this to Lee face to face many times. I'm here to offer my views and give you the benefit of all my judgment and all of my experience. But ultimately, the boss makes the call. He'll listen to it, and if he wants to not go with that and go with his own plan, then he has to do it, and the subordinate has to carry that out. And that's what Longstreet did as professionally as he could, even though he knew it was wrong. To forcefully, you cannot just say, I refuse to do it. The only way you could do that would be then to tender your resignation on the spot. And don't think Longstreet was going to do that from a professional standpoint. He just wasn't going to do that. And these were also people of their time. They're, they were very steeped in personal honor, and it's just something you just don't do. It's just, that would, it's as wrong as what to do that would be, even though you're professionally correct in your assessment as a professional infantryman, to do that would be as wrong as Benedict Arnold was to commit, what he did. So I don't think that's why he would do that, or any one of these people, doesn't matter what side they're on in this time period.
Okay, thank you. What were some of Longstreet's pre-Civil War experiences that kind of gave him the insight into tactics that he had?
Yeah, I think General Longstreet was commissioned infantry, so he understood the infantry branch very well, and he knew everything that it could and it couldn't do, as well as you could learn in peacetime, even before the Mexican War. Excuse me. And then when he went to the Mexican War, he saw it in action. He was part of the attack and defense in action. Now, there's one battle that his unit attacked a very strong Mexican defensive position that was well prepared and also very well led. It had a very good officer apparently that had everything at the ready, and Longstreet's unit was repulsed. And General Longstreet was wounded there. He got a bullet in the leg at this battle, and so I think that probably gave him a stinging lesson that a lot of these Napoleonic assumptions about the offense, the tactical offensive always being dominant, because of the range of the weapons. The musket in these days, in the time of Napoleon, could shoot out to about 80 yards. It became greater in the Civil War, out to 300 yards in the Civil War. But, in the 1840s, it was still more than Napoleonic time. I think, in fact, the Mexican army had bought used British muskets from the Napoleonic period. So about 80 yards. But, it was a lesson that the tactical defense was actually stronger than the offense when they took advantage of defensive works, preparation, and good leadership. It thwarted the offense. And so I think he took this to heart and understood this to be the real truth, not what most people believed from the classroom, going into West Point classroom or another school classroom, going into the Civil War. And especially compared to a lot of these guys who may have been in the Army for 3 or 4 years after they graduated from West Point, but then got out of the Army after that and went into the civilian sector, and they didn't really continue on. They didn't continue on with their profession. They did something else, whatever, become a lawyer, work in the railroad, and so on and so on. And then they could become an officer in the Civil War, and they really haven't a clue about some of this stuff, and they learn the hard way. Whereas Longstreet, I think, got an understanding, a painful understanding from a battle long before the war, that what the truth was,
Right.
what worked and what didn't work.
Okay, thank you. Well, this has been a very interesting look at his approach to tactics. Thank you very much for sharing this with us tonight. We have a link to Harold's book in the chat, and as was mentioned earlier, it is scheduled to come out in October. You can pre-order that now, and then it will ship to you when it's ready. We have a reminder, of course, that History Camp America is in just 2 days. It's this coming Saturday, and today is the last day to register. So if you waited till the last minute, you only have till midnight to do that. So go to historycamp.org and you can register there. Next week, we will have Francis Gary Powers Jr. joining us, and he's going to talk to us about his father's experience in the Cold War U-2 incident, where his spy plane was shot down over the Soviet Union. If you have seen the movie Bridge of Spies with Tom Hanks, you'll be familiar with this story. So we hope you'll join us and get some more background on that. And Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Harold. Everyone have a
Thank you.
good night. And Harold, hold on for 1 second when I close this.
Thanks, everyone. See you Saturday.